What if the person you trusted most was hiding the darkest secret imaginable? What if a killer walked free for 60 years, living an ordinary life while families mourned? Today, we're diving into 3 cold cases that prove the truth never stays buried forever. Before we uncover these chilling mysteries, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for ColdcaseYT-jay. Smash that like button if you believe justice has no expiration date, and drop a comment telling us which unsolved case keeps you up at night. Let's get into it. On the afternoon of Friday, September 24, 1965, in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, 18-year-old Alice Eberhardt, a nursing student, was home alone. When her parents returned to the family house, they discovered a devastating scene. Alice had been brutally attacked, stabbed, and bludgeoned to death. The crime shocked the neighborhood. On what had long been a quiet suburban street, a young woman's life was taken with sudden and extreme violence, and no one had heard a thing. The cause of death, multiple heavy blows to the head and stab wounds, was so brutal that the officers at the crime scene said they could scarcely believe it was the work of anyone other than a monster. From the moment they discovered her body, Bergen County investigators threw every tool they had at the case. In 1965, the forensic tools available to investigators were rudimentary compared to modern standards. Crime scene technicians focused on securing visible fingerprints, blood typing, and hair and fiber analysis. In the Eberhardt case, there were several specific details about the crime scene that were withheld from the public in order to preserve the integrity of future interrogations. One such detail involved the perpetrator's entry into the home. For decades, it was speculated that the intruder had used a standard point of entry, such as a forced door or an open window. However, the physical evidence suggested what one detective wrote was a different way of gaining access, a detail that would not be confirmed for 60 years. Furthermore, the assailant did not simply kill and flee. He took a specific article of clothing that Alice was wearing at the time of her death. Despite interviewing family and friends, as well as neighbors, no leads were found. Without concrete evidence and without a suspect, the investigation soon stalled. As the years passed, the crime faded into local lore. In the 1970s and 80s, other headlines drew attention, and Alice's case turned into a tragic mystery that police and neighbors wanted to know the answer to, but the trail had long since grown cold. In the spring of 2021, a former classmate of Alice reached out to Fairlawn Police Department. This phone call, made to Detective Brian Rupika, requested that the department take another look at the 1965 murder. Following this call, the case was officially reopened. Detective Rupika and Sergeant Eric Elishwich were tasked with the full review of the 1965 case file. Their first objective was to re-examine the evidence with a 21st-century perspective, looking for patterns that might link Alice's murder to other known offenders who were active in the New York-New Jersey area during the late 1960s. One clue fell into their lap almost immediately. As they reviewed records, the officers realized that a notorious name cropped up, Richard Cottingham, later dubbed the Torso Killer. He had been living and working in northern New Jersey at the time. Cottingham was by then serving multiple life sentences for other murders, but at the time of Alice's death, he had lived in the area, so detectives decided to pay him a visit behind bars. In late 2021 and into 2022, Rupika and Elishwich arranged interviews with Cottingham at New Jersey's correctional facility. The process of securing a confession was not a single event, but a series of more than 5 meetings at Trenton State Prison and later Southwood State Prison. Detectives Rupika and Elishwich spent hours building a rapport with the subject. They knew that he was a man who thrived on attention and the exercising of power. When they first identified themselves as being from the Fairlawn Police Department, the suspect's reaction was an immediate, "Ah, Fairlawn." During their second visit, detectives introduced the name Alice Eberhardt. They carefully monitored the suspect's reactions and noted a shift in his demeanor, a spark of recognition that confirmed they were on the right track. Then a key breakthrough came when Rupika asked how the killer had entered the Eberhardt house. Ellishwich recalls that Cottingham said that the killer actually did it a different way. This showed them that Cottingham knew a fact about the crime scene that had never been made public, which they knew that only the real killer could have known. This was the moment, detectives said, when they realized their instincts were correct. Over the next month, the pair questioned Cottingham multiple times. Police later said that he provided a full confession, including details that were never publicly known. At one point, Cottingham even mentioned Alice's clothing, an item the family still starkly remembers. He described the article of clothing in the house that Alice was wearing, which was never revealed to the public. Rupika noted that this gave them additional confidence of his culpability in the crime. Every new detail provided to them by Cottingham fit the crime scene perfectly. Finally, on December 22, 2025, exactly 60 years after the crime, Cottingham formally confessed to killing Alice Eberhardt. The meeting lasted hours and was recorded on video for the first time. By confessing, Cottingham answered questions that had haunted the Eberhardt family since 1965. One detective mused that this was an admission that even the killer recognized was only a matter of time in the making. Cottingham told police that he saw Alice randomly one day outside the hospital with friends. At a later date, he tracked her down to her home, and that's when he decided to violently attack her. Fairlawn's police chief immediately announced that the city's only unsolved homicide was finally closed. In a statement, Chief Joseph Dwicky praised the detectives' persistence. He noted that while we can never bring Alice back, he hoped that the confession would bring the family some peace. Today, Richard Cottingham, now in his late 70s, remains behind bars at New Jersey's Southwood State Prison, where he is serving 3 life sentences. Investigators count him among America's most notorious killers, and he will never see freedom again. In the fall of 1998, Linda Marie Rutledge was 43 years old, a Lexington, Kentucky resident known to family and friends for her kindness and dependable nature. Born and raised in what is called the Bluegrass State, she was deeply connected to her family's small business, the Nixon Hearing Aid Center, located at 121 Malibu Drive. Across Lexington, patrons of the generational business recalled Linda's helpful manner and ready smile. Linda's life was rooted in daily routines of work and community. She lived in a stable, quiet neighborhood where serious crime was rare. There were no indications in her background of any personal struggles or risky behaviors that might put her in heightened danger. On the morning of November 7, 1998, responders were called to the scene of a structure fire at the Nixon Hearing Aid Center after smoke and flames were reported by early morning passers-by. Firefighters with the Lexington Fire Department arrived on scene around 7:40 a.m., quickly battling the blaze that had taken hold of the commercial building. It was routine work at first, with the goal of extinguishing the fire. But what lay beyond the flames would be far more tragic than any loss of a commercial building. In the back hallway of the business, responders discovered a body. The woman was later identified as Linda Rutledge, found deceased inside the building despite firefighters' best efforts to suppress the flames. However, her death initially raised questions because the injuries she sustained had little to do with fire. An autopsy by the Fayette County Coroner's Office revealed the grim truth. Linda Rutledge had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to the head far before the fire had ever started. Smoking ashes, burned wood, and the crumpled remnants of retail fixtures belied a startling reality. The fire was likely merely a cover-up, staged after the fatal assault. Linda's personal vehicle was discovered in a nearby apartment complex parking lot days after the fire. Police believe she had been killed the night before, likely on November 6, and that the fire was set in the early morning hours to destroy evidence and to complicate detection of her murderer. The investigation began with standard protocols. Detectives collected physical evidence from the scene, obtained witness statements from relatives and acquaintances, and scoured Linda's last known movements. But the trail soon dried up. There were no credible leads, and in the absence of eyewitness testimony or surveillance footage, in what was an era before widespread camera networks and digital tracking, investigators quickly found themselves struggling to find leads. Linda's killing was classified as a homicide. But with no suspects, no motive, and no reliable evidence pointing to a person of interest, the case stagnated. For years, it was listed among Lexington's unsolved homicides. For nearly 3 decades, the Lexington Police Department and local law enforcement maintained open case files, periodically re-examining details in light of technological advances. Detectives archived physical evidence carefully, hoping that one day science would catch up with the mystery. There were occasional public appeals for information and participation in Crime Stoppers programs, alongside media coverage urging anyone with knowledge to come forward. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. But the first major breakthrough came decades after the crime, not from Kentucky's work alone, but through an unexpected collaboration between forensic scientists across state lines. In July of 2025, the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, also known as NIBIN, generated a crucial connection. A .380 caliber shell casing recovered from the scene of Linda's murder was matched to another casing recovered in Austin, Texas, as it connected the gun used in the notorious yogurt shop murders with the same gun used to kill Linda Rutledge. The yogurt shop murders refers to a quadruple homicide of teenage girls that had itself confounded investigators for years. We've covered this case in our other video, and you can find the link to that case in the description below. This ballistic match was highly significant, as it suggested that the same firearm had been used in both crimes. However, ballistics alone were not enough. Detectives needed a biological link as well. In September of 2025, a sexual assault kit from the Rutledge case, preserved for all these years, was sent to DNA Labs International for advanced testing. The results returned a profile that matched the DNA that was linked to the Austin case, known as the yogurt shop murders, reinforcing the theory that it was the same individual involved in both crimes. Investigators then identified the man whose DNA and firearm evidence intersected both the Kentucky and Texas cases. That man was Robert Eugene Brashers. Robert Eugene Brashers was not an unknown figure in law enforcement circles. However, by the time his connection to Linda Rutledge was established, he had been long deceased since January of 1999. If alive today, authorities said he would have been charged with murder in connection with the killing of Linda Rutledge. Brashers had a lengthy criminal history. In March of 1998, months before Linda's death, Brashers was implicated in the murder of a mother and daughter in Portageville, Missouri. Later, his connection to the 1991 yogurt shop murders in Austin, Texas would serve as a morbid and stark mirror to the 1998 murder of Linda Rutledge. In both cases, females were shot in the building before it was set ablaze. While he lived, Brashears had evaded definitive culpability for these crimes by moving across state lines. His movements across states, unknown at the time to local investigators working separate cold cases, were only brought to light through modern forensic databases and interagency cooperation. For the family of Linda Rutledge and the Lexington community, the identification of a suspect nearly 27 years after her murder brings a measure of closure long denied. Although Brashears cannot be prosecuted due to his death, the resolution of the case honors Rutledge's memory and underscores the work of generations of detectives and community members who refused to classify her homicide as irrelevant simply with the passing of time. Deborah Elizabeth Espy was a 19-year-old college student in Niceville, Florida, a quiet, quintessential all-American girl in the dawn of 1973. Those who knew her remember Deborah as quiet, sweet, and devoted to her studies at Okaloosa Walton Junior College, now Northwest Florida State College. She was beloved by family and friends and a key part of the community. On the morning of March 12, 1973, Deborah finished a routine class and headed off campus as she did every day. After her morning class ended, a campus custodian later told detectives that he saw Deborah getting into the vehicle of a man. This would be the last time Deborah was ever seen alive. When she failed to return home that afternoon, her family immediately realized something was wrong. By evening, Deborah's father had reported her missing to the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office. The disappearance triggered a widespread search. Family, friends, and campus staff scoured local roads, parks, and wooded areas. Despite the community's efforts, however, Deborah remained missing, and police feared she had been abducted as days passed with no sign of her. Investigators treated the case as a potential kidnapping. They interviewed Deborah's friends, classmates, and anyone who may have seen her. The custodians tipped that Deborah had been seen leaving campus with a male acquaintance guided the early inquiry, but for weeks, police found no leads. Nearly 4 weeks after Deborah vanished, in mid-April of 1973, a local bicyclist searching near the Rocky Bayou stumbled upon a grim sight. Deborah's body, covered by brush and hidden in a shallow grave beside a wooded trail. The location was isolated, on the Air Force Base reservation next to the Rocky Bayou Country Club, a place the unsuspecting commuter would have never found by chance. Deborah's body was taken to the coroner, and investigators began cataloging evidence, clothing, blood samples, and the disturbed earth of the grave. The medical examiner confirmed after autopsy that Deborah had suffered a violent beating before she died. The crime scene yielded little in the way of footprints or fingerprints, as the body had lain undiscovered for weeks. From the start, one lead loomed larger than the rest. Investigators kept returning to the custodian's statement. Deborah had left campus that morning with someone. Over time, detectives narrowed that description to that of a single person, a fellow student who had been in Deborah's circle. Although his identity was never publicized during the investigation, he remained the only suspect in Deborah's case from the beginning. Investigators quietly focused in on him, interviewing friends and family about his whereabouts that day. Yet, the evidence was circumstantial. No witness placed him with Deborah at the exact burial site, and he had an alibi that day that was never fully disproven. Without physical proof or DNA evidence, authorities could not charge him in 1973, and the investigation stalled. At the time, investigators wondered if Deborah's killing might be linked to another brutal college murder nearby. Forensic teams later tested Deborah's evidence against DNA from that victim, who was named Therese Dusevich, also 19 years old, killed in Niceville 8 months later. But modern tests ultimately showed no connection between the two cases. In 2012, cold case units across Florida began using a new DNA technique on old evidence. In Deborah's case, detectives re-examined the items from the burial site. Unfortunately, storage of the evidence from the 1970s had been far less sophisticated than today. As the Okaloosa County cold case investigator later explained, many of those crime scene samples had degraded. Investigators could not even recover Deborah's own DNA from a pivotal piece of evidence. Over the years, Okaloosa County Sheriff's officials met regularly to review the evidence, discussing any small clues that may have emerged. Old tips were rechecked, and in 2024, the case was even featured in a cold case media program attempting to bring public attention to any dormant leads. The breakthrough ultimately came not from new science, but from the re-examining of all the old facts. Investigators painstakingly pieced together Deborah's final hours, looking at every angle. They confirmed the custodian's account and compared it against interviews from 1973. In the end, authorities concluded there was only one logical culprit, the man who had been seen with Deborah that day, the man who was already known to police. He was the killer. In January of 2026, Sheriff Eric Aden announced that the sole suspect was Okaloosa County resident Dennis Murphy, a man who was long known to law enforcement. Review of the case found no other plausible offender, and everything lined up with Murphy's movements on March 12, 1973. Investigating Officer Kelly Henderson said, "Just the whole totality of the interviewing, the evidence that was located on scene, we have no reason to believe that anybody else is responsible other than Dennis Murphy." Henderson also added that the reason the suspect couldn't be named back in 1973 is that there was no conclusive DNA testing that would render him 100% the suspect. Unfortunately, Murphy could not be charged. As of February of 2023, he had died in an unrelated traffic accident in Alabama. His death, 50 years after Deborah's murder, meant there would be no trial nor confession. With Dennis Murphy gone, the sheriff's office formally closed the case as solved, citing death of the offender as the reason. Law enforcement and Deborah's family reacted with a mix of relief and sorrow. Police acknowledged that the community would never be able to understand Murphy's motive. Deborah and Murphy had been casual acquaintances at school, and it appears something that day turned deadly. What matters to Deborah's loved ones is knowing what happened after 5 decades. Speaking on behalf of the Espy family, Deborah's sister-in-law, Deborah Espy, said the family was grateful to finally see the case closed. These 3 cases remind us that no matter how much time passes, the truth finds its way to the surface. If these stories moved you, honor these victims by subscribing to ColdcaseYT-jay and hitting that notification bell so you never miss when justice is served. Drop a like if you believe every victim deserves to be remembered, and tell us in the comments which cold case you want us to investigate next. Remember, the coldest cases often hold the hottest truths. Until next time, stay vigilant.